And I opened up on Instagram, my Instagram, Jake Hofer, and wanted a few different questions from different folks to talk about. And we'll dive into that right now. So, one of the questions we had is what to do about dog problems on a property when neighbors don't cooperate. Thankfully, I've only had to deal with this one time, and the neighbors did cooperate. So, we had deer or dogs running deer off really bad. They were chasing them across the field, and we talked to them a few times. And then eventually, I just went over there and had a very straightforward conversation, and we haven't had a problem since. So, and it's interesting too, because I know different parts of the country have more random dogs running around. So here in Illinois, it's really not a prevalent issue that I run into often, but I know down south, there's just a lot more random dogs, and I could see that being really frustrating. And unfortunately, I don't have a clear plan. I'm sure there's someone out there that has dealt with this and more experience in it and can provide better insight than me. But I think having a very straightforward and stern conversation with your neighbors when you spend a lot of money to buy a piece and you have something like that is semi-controllable, bad neighbors impacting your ground is super frustrating. And I think if you talk to them and share where you're coming from, I think most people would understand and then try to figure out some sort of course of action. Another question is the ability excuse me, the ability to negotiate land price in a high interest rate environment. So we're in a higher interest rate environment than what we were in 2020 and 21, and obviously before that too. So interest rates have increased drastically, but it hasn't necessarily slowed down the amount of deals going on. From what I see, there's still a lack of inventory. The upgrade, so the guys that were, let's say, going from a 40 to an 80 has definitely slowed down because they're locked into a better rate and they're not as motivated to go upgrade farms because the payment's going to be drastically more. So I think this is something that continues to play out. One thing that I've noticed is interest rates are obviously a factor in the purchasing decision and what you can afford and what the payments are, and obviously will impact a lot of different factors. But I wouldn't have it be a total detriment to whatever plan you have in place. So if you have saved up the money, you're looking to buy something, you find a farm that you really like, just crunch the numbers and buy it. And you can use the interest rates potentially as a negotiating tactic and say, hey, there is a less pool of buyers for this farm, and I'm here right now. I hope we can get a deal done, is one thing that I would consider. And then we don't know where interest rates are going to go. The Fed said they are not going to raise rates here for the next little bit here, but then I've also read that they're going to raise it 2 more times by the end of the year. So we're at 8.25% right now, and maybe that gets to 9, maybe that gets to 10%, or maybe it ends up getting a 15%. I have no clue, but I think if it does get that high, it's going to cripple a lot of buyers that are financing, and the cash buyers out there who have a really great financial moat will have the advantage there. And so most people who are listening are probably just getting started out. And I just encourage you to be really methodical. I think I wouldn't necessarily bank on rates dropping, thinking that you can refinance, but it's a possibility. And I would look for the facts that are in front of you, work with that. And anything that happens beyond that, have a plan of if they do go down, great. If they go higher, you're locked in for maybe a 5-year arm or 10-year arm, or maybe you decide to get 30-year fixed rate interest rate from a different lender. So there's a lot of different options out there for financing, and obviously a long-term fixed rate is going to be a higher percentage rate. And I would just encourage you to read some articles and really look at all the facts that are in front of you. And we can only control so much, and those are one of those things that we cannot control. So work with what's in front of you and make the most of it. Another question, which is this could be a whole topic in itself, and it is, can you trust a realtor that has the same intentions of yourself? And then I asked a follow-up question for them just to clarify, to make sure that I understood properly. And so they said, I've not had any personal instances, but if a realtor is in the land investing / flipping game as well, how can one trust them to pass on a great deal? Or how can they honestly say it's a great deal and not take it for himself if he is also in the market? Does it make sense for him to keep the best potentials for himself? Or maybe there's something in place that prevents realtors from doing this. This is something I put a lot of thought into personally, because I do have a clear passion of trying to find parcels that make sense to buy. And I think as a real estate professional, it can be certainly a little challenging to navigate. And what I would say to that is different agents are going to have different goals on what they're trying to buy. And I think if me being an agent, I would try to buy stuff that is either on the market so listed or at auctions. But I think the waters can get a little bit muddy when you're trying to buy stuff off market. And I also think, and this is based off some conversations I've had with other folks that do this, that maybe aren't agents, and they've expressed you need to be really careful. So if I was just a guy and you're talking to an agent that also buys and sells, and also is a real estate agent, I think you just have that honest conversation with them. And there's still a lot of great deals out there over a course of time. So they're not able to buy every single deal out there. And I think this becoming knowledgeable, understanding the market, and then also relying on a real estate professional is really key. Another thing when it comes to people who are buying and selling ground, a lot of times it is just more mathematical for them. They're wanting to not hold on to that property forever. So a lot of times if you're buying something from them, you're able to get it right at market or maybe slightly below so they can go on to the next deal. So I think they're not necessarily trying to squeeze every single dollar. Like an example would be a seller that inherited a piece of ground and they want to sell it. Maybe their expectations are unrealistic or very high. They're going to want to get every single penny, and maybe they're not as motivated as someone that is wanting to sell that and move on to something else. So I wouldn't be totally scared to buy something from someone like that. And then in terms of trusting them, if this is such a great deal, why haven't you bought it? It's a great question. It's a great question. And I think just finding an agent that you can trust and have them be very candid with you is key. And as a real estate professional, I think it's really challenging. A lot of the guys that do buy and sell out of ground are not agents for that specific reason. But it can be a little bit murky. And I think that is probably a whole topic in itself. And we'll have to record a podcast. Maybe I'll get a couple of different agents and get their perspective on the topic. I know there's guys that do it. I know there's guys that don't do it. And I know that there's guys that have done it and it did not end up well for them. So I think finding an agent that plans on being there for a really long time and their reputation is far more important than getting one deal and flipping it or whatever you want to call it. So that's my 2 cents on that. Great question.